Hey, welcome to Whole Human Psychology. Today I'm going to cover part 2 of our 8-part series of being stuck in threat cycles. So today we're talking about the overwhelm freeze cycle. So what this is if you've ever had this experience where you have so much to do that you do nothing, this is exactly what I'm talking about. You're overwhelmed, there's tons you have to do, and you actually get way less done. You walk into the room, you freeze up, and you just do something else. You distract yourself. You don't actually tackle all the stuff you need to do because it's so important and there's so much of it. So that seems a little bit ridiculous, right? You've got to do it. It's so important, and that's when you can actually get the least done. So this is called the overwhelm freeze cycle. So what happens is overwhelm happens when we feel helpless in front of a problem. You're overwhelmed and you're like, this is way, way, way too much for me. And so you feel helpless and you freeze. That's our freeze response is connected to feeling helpless. Because when we feel like we have some agency, we can fight or we can run away, right? Those are things that we have agency over, that we can do, that are connected to our power. But if our power isn't enough for a situation, we freeze and we start shutting down. We actually stop engaging. And it's another way of saving ourselves. It saves us from pain. We stop engaging. Hopefully they leave us alone. Hopefully the big scary problems leave us alone. Or if they do attack us, we won't feel it as much because we're shut down. We're frozen. And so when we freeze, the problems don't go away, right? We still have all of those big important problems that we're not dealing with. And actually what happens is more get added on because life likes to bring up new problems. And so when we're frozen, it doesn't solve our problems. It actually just builds up the overwhelm. And then we freeze even more. And then builds up the overwhelm and freeze even more. And so we get stuck in this cycle where we have too much to do and so we can't do it. So how do we break that? Well, remember that the main problem here is helplessness. So the more you can actually build a sense of confidence, build a sense of agency, build a sense that you can do it, that you have power in the situation. And so one of my favorite ways of doing this is by breaking down problems. What happens often is that we evaluate my resources, my capability against what the problem needs right now. And we have this big problem and my little resources. So if you think of it like running a marathon, I'm sitting here being like, I can hardly run a mile, and you want me to run a marathon. That's way too much. I can't handle that. I can't do that. I'm just going to freeze. I'm not even going to try it. I'm not even going to engage that problem because it's way too big. But if you break it down, say, okay, you can run a mile. I want you to push it and run 1.5 miles today. And then you run 1.5 miles and we're going to celebrate that. Whoa, you did that. You pushed past your limit and you conquered part of the problem. And then we're going to run 1.5 miles and 1.5 miles and then 2 miles and then 2 miles and then 2.5 miles. And then maybe we do a jump up to 5 miles. And all of these steps, we're not saying, oh, you didn't run a marathon, you didn't run a marathon, you didn't run a marathon. Because that's constantly comparing us against the big giant problem. All of those steps instead, we're building that sense of agency, that confidence. Hey, you ran 2 miles. That's twice as much as you could run before. If you think back to 2 weeks ago, you're already doing twice as much. And we're going to honor that and celebrate that and really see that as like, you did that. Even if you don't run a marathon, you are now running twice as much as you could before. And so we can break down these big problems. I had to do this when I was doing my thesis in graduate school. It's like, this is a giant paper that's going to take you years to write. That's too much for me. I don't have time. I don't have energy. I can't do that. But I'm going to spend 20 minutes in the library today and read one article. Then I'm going to read another article. And then I'm going to find half an hour over here. And then I'm going to talk to this professor about that. And then I'm going to follow this lead. So all of these tiny goals that can build up your sense of agency, build up your sense of confidence, return you to a place of power instead of a place of helplessness. Hey, I can do that. I can read one article. Hey, I can spend an hour in the library. That's actually something I can do. And maybe it's hard for me to do, but I can push myself and get there. And by pushing myself, actually build up this sense of agency and confidence. And so this is the best way to approach big, giant problems. Because in that moment, I actually can't do everything. I can't write my thesis right now. And I'm not supposed to. I'm supposed to do this much today, and this much today, and this much tomorrow. And so if we break it down and change our mindset and celebrate each of those tiny victories, we can return to that sense of power and confidence. Another way I like to do this is to get even tinier with goals. I call them micro goals. So when I'm working with people, I say, okay, what are all the things on your to-do list? All right, now take each one of those and break it down into 2 things you can do in the next week. And then I say, let's do 2 micro goals. So pick out each of those and do 1 goal you can do in the next 30 seconds or the next minute. And so that's already starting progress. Maybe all I can do in 30 seconds is text a friend and say, I need help. Or to look up something on the internet that says, okay, how do I download that? But it gets me going. You've already started tackling the problem within 30 seconds, within a minute. And so that's a cool way I found to challenge myself in a creative way to say, hey, what can I do in 30 seconds? What can I do in a minute? How could I take a tiny step, a micro goal? How could I reach something? But then what else it does is it gets you engaging the problem in a way that's coming from your own mastery, from your own power. You've accomplished something already in 30 seconds. And so you're starting to fight the problem and find that you actually have power and confidence there instead of helplessness. Another big thing I like to do with this is actually we talked about celebrating and honoring where you do have these victories. And so even if it's totally unrelated to the problem you're facing, another way I like to do this with the people I work with is by looking back at their last week and just coming up with 10 things they're proud of. What are 10 things you're proud of in the last week? And actually that's really, really hard for people. We don't often focus on what we're proud of. We focus on where there's problems, then we accomplish them and they're not problems anymore, so we don't look at them. We don't say, hey, I actually did something really amazing. I conquered something. I did that. And so just looking at 10 things you're proud of from the last week can return you to this place of, hey, I'm actually doing things in my life. I'm moving forward. I have that power. I have agency in my life, and I'm using that agency to do things that are good, to do things that I can be proud of. And then I take this other step and I connect it to what value were you living out while you were doing that? What value are you proud of in that accomplishment? So maybe I was living love, or maybe I was courageous, or really determined, or perseverance, or resilience. What value were you bringing out? Compassion, freedom, connection. So then you can do that in the past, but then you can also do that in the future. So we have this big to-do list of all these things you need to do. Start connecting them to values. Why does that matter to you? Why do you need to do that? What is so important about this to-do list? Maybe it's okay. I need to do that because it's responsibility to my family, and I love my family. So start connecting it to where it really matters. Because again, when we get into problem mindset, we focus on where the danger is at. and to start getting out of a problem mindset, because freeze is a problem mindset. There's danger and it's way too much for me. To start getting out of a problem mindset, we can recapture the sense of agency, but we can also look at the values. What's worth living for? Because threat mindset is, what do I need to survive? But a growth mindset is, what's actually worth living for? What do I want to pursue? What have I done well? And so overall, again, we can get into this overwhelm freeze cycle where the problem's way too big, we feel helpless, so we freeze up. And that doesn't solve our problems, I guess. And so how do we break out of that? We break down into places where we can actually feel confident while pushing ourselves. We can recognize our accomplishments and honor them and celebrate them and build up that sense of agency, that sense of confidence, that sense of power. And then we can connect it to why this matters in the first place. What is the good thing we're trying to pursue? The good that we're trying to live?